Hello, my name is Andre Ward, and I'm the Associate Vice President of the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy at the Fortune Society. Welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the legal system from various perspectives, including people most impacted by the criminal legal system. We discuss critical issues about criminal legal reform and raise questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone that is impacted by it. We ask you, the listener and the viewer, to spread the word about both sides of the bars. You can share your comments on Twitter at the Fortune Society SOC. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about Pell Grants restoration. And when we think about that, significance as it affects so many people. Recently, Congress presented stimulus package that included significant changes to higher education, including the restoration of federal finances, financial aid for people that are in prison. And in 1994, as it currently existed, following that year, it was banned. And the restoration of Pell Grants now for incarcerated people means so much and really represents a watershed moment for those who are involved in the criminal legal reform world. Today, I have the good fortune of having someone who is not only just impacted by Pell Grants in the way that they have obviously grown and developed, but also is representing those issues here today. I have none other than Daiwan Tatro. And Daiwan, obviously, he joins us as the Government Affairs Officer at the Bard Prison Initiative. As a Bard Prison Initiative alumnus, he really leverages his education and experience to shift public policy in favor of expanding college and prisons. Daiwan, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today? And welcome to Both Sides of the Bars.
Thank you, Andre, for having me. And I'd also like to highlight for everyone, I also happen to be a board member at the Fortune Society, which is truly an honor.
Absolutely. And we thank you for your work that you do at the Fortune Society as a board member. And thank you again for joining the show. I really want to get right into it. Daiwan, we've been having this conversation over the last few weeks or so. And obviously you are truly passionate about this work, have been featured in a really, really powerful and amazing documentary to highlight the importance of education. Talk to us, give us a little historical context about Pell and federal aid to folk who are incarcerated.
Yeah, so a lot of people don't understand or know the history here. So prior to 1994, for about 2 generations, college and prison had been standard practice, fundamental to what we term rehabilitation within the American prison system. So the 1994 crime bill, the Democratic tough on crime moment made incarcerated individuals ineligible for federal Pell Grants. And so what we see nationally is that the number of college and prison programs fell from over 700 to less than 10 pretty much overnight. And Congress did this despite the fact that if someone got an education in prison, they were the least likeliest not only to ever go back to prison, but also had the most successful life outcomes post-release. And so Pell was eliminated, in the face of overwhelming body of evidence that pointed to its efficacy.
Yeah, and so when we're talking about that, and I know that, when we're talking about the efficacy of education and the real positive outcomes of higher education, it just made sense, right, to keep that in existence. But, in the state, right, you had Democrats and Republicans alike at the time, in many instances, particularly those from upstate, that were elevating and lifting up this idea that people that are incarcerated are getting higher education at the cost of taxpayers, right, and taken away from their own children in those instances, right, getting access to college. So talk about, like, when you think about that, right, these outcomes, right? You say it went from 700 prisons throughout throughout the country, receiving that nationally till 10, right? Talk about, like, how much sense does that make to do something like that? And talk a little bit more about the outcome piece.
the Pell ban didn't make sense at any level. On the human level, if we're going to send people back to prison to rehabilitate them, but strip them from having any meaningful programs that allows them to effectively transition back into society to find gainful employment, that doesn't make sense. In terms of economics, the Rand Corporation just found in 2016 that for every dollar the state spends on college and prison programming, it saves $4 to $5 in reincarceration costs. And so Pell,
can you repeat that again? Can you repeat that again, Daiwan?
State invests in college and prison, it saves $4 to $5 in reincarceration costs. And so educating people in prison actually saves money. It doesn't cost money. But in terms of, someone in prison taking kind of like college dollars away from someone else, Pell is an entitlement program, right? And so this is not a zero-sum game. This is not somebody in prison gets a Pell grant and somebody else does it, right? There's enough money within that program to fund tons and tons of education in this country.
It's interesting to note that because most people think otherwise, right? So that data and that reference that you've just given makes perfect sense. And so now we're talking about obviously like where we are now, right? We find ourselves in a position to some degree where, there has been the restoration, obviously, or restoring of Pell. And what does that mean, right? And what we have to go through to get there?
So, this has been an amazing fight by, different activists and advocates for 26 years. People like Vivian Nixon at the College and Community Fellowship, my executive director, Max Kennedy, at the Bar Prison Initiative, the Vera Institute of Justice and college and prison programs all over this country, have really, really worked for this moment. And it took a bipartisan group in Congress to come together and get this through, and of all people, Donald Trump to sign this in law. I don't think any of us foresaw that it was going to happen at this moment, but it did, right? And what it means is that Pell restoration means in terms of kind of numbers and what that's going to do to college and prison landscape nationally, is that we're going to see tens and tens of thousands of incarcerated individuals enrolled in college, over the next 5 years, right? It doesn't go into effect until 2024. So that's going to give some time for the DOE to change the FAFSA, to get programs up and running and applied to draw down Pell. There's some protections built into the bill to disqualify kind of predatory institutions in the college and prison space. But what we're going to see is a dramatic increase in the number of individuals enrolled. In what that means in terms of society on the ground is that we're sending people back to their communities who are ready to step into the workplace, who are ready to pay taxes, who are ready to go back in their communities like our alumni overwhelming at BPI and change the forces and factors on the ground that led to their incarceration in the first place. So we should never underestimate the value of incarceration and what it means to have individuals with both an education and the experience to affect real change.
Speaking of which, right, folk, obviously, they're getting educated through the Pell Grant, right? At least that's one part of it. And we'll talk about the other part that's a critical piece to getting access in higher education in prison. But for example, people who went through the higher education programs, they come out tax-paying people, right? They become an asset rather than a liability to the community, and they live a life of contribution. You seem, obviously, Daiwan, you have a story to tell, right? And for our listening or for our viewers, right, talk to us about your own trajectory, right, your own educational odyssey, and what did that yield relative to debates and other doors that have been open to you because you were a beneficiary off of higher education in prison. Talk to our viewers about that.
Yeah, I think a great place to start is, someone once asked a colleague of mine, whether or not they deserve an education in prison. He said, for me, that's not the question. The question is what I'm going to do with it, right? And so I'm someone who just spent 12 years in prison, got into the Bar Prison Initiative in 2013, Spent 5 years incarcerated, working on a degree, got out, finished my senior project at Bard, graduated in 2018, and have done a number of different things before assuming my current role at BPI, where I've worked on Pell restoration at the federal level, but doing work primarily here in New York State and in New York City to build reentry supports for our alumni coming out of prison and to really protect the college and prison landscape in New York, which is one of the best in the country, to preserve that as we move towards full Pell restoration, right? But what it means to have an education or to leave prison with an education, right? Just irrespective of the degree. I have an older brother who's been to prison. I have a younger brother who's been to prison. And the types of opportunities that have been allotted to them coming out of prison without having an education or a degree stand in really, really contrast to the types of things that I have been able to do. And so when we talk about the value of it to the individual, both of my brothers have young children. Them not being able to find meaningful, gainful, long-term employment to build careers, that's going to have an impact on the way that they're able to care for their families, right? Sure. And so we can't only think of the value of education in prison at the level of the individual, of the incarcerated individual, right? This is something that radiates outwards, right? This has an impact on societies. It has an impact on communities. It has an impact on families.
Sure. And, again, speaking, Daiwan, about your own educational odyssey while inside, right, you were featured in a documentary, right? In addition to that, this documentary, I saw it, I was blown away, not because you're the exception, right, Daiwan? Although you're powerful, you're a leader, and we have tremendous respect for you, and there are no exceptions necessarily for those of us who are leaders or formerly incarcerated, but just the experience alone, right? That documentary demonstrated excellence, right? And what human beings who are incarcerated have the opportunity to become once put in the right space and given the opportunity. Talk a little bit about your experience with the debate that occurred with you in the documentary.
Absolutely, Andre. But, I want to spend a moment on that idea of exceptionalism, because it's something that me and I think all BPI alumni run up against. And what I like to tell people is that, I'm not an exceptional person. I had an exceptional opportunity. Right. And that opportunity made all of the difference. And so the value of an education, as I keep saying, is something that is really, really highlighted in College Behind Bars, which is a 4-hour documentary, executive produced by Ken Burns, directed by Lynn Novick. It was released in November of 2019, and we've spent the last 18 months to 2 years all over the country on a social impact campaign around the film. We did several screenings on Capitol Hill in support of Pell restoration. And as you say, Andre, the film is really, really super powerful. And one of the most powerful elements for me is that, unlike other Lynn Novick films where there's a narrator, there's no narrator in this film, right? It's incarcerated people speaking for themselves, representing themselves. And what that does is that really overturns and pushes back against the negative stereotypes and caricatures that we usually see willed out to suppress ideas of what incarcerated people are capable of and who they are. One of the things we like to say at the Bar Prison Initiative is that we're in the business of education, and part of that business defying expectations of who education is for and where it might lead.
Absolutely. And you all were featured debating those folk from Harvard, right? And I know obviously you're humble, so you're humble, Daiwan, so you don't really lift it up. But it's a big deal, right? But you all were inside, right? You were involved in this educational experience, you and other men who were incarcerated, and took on the challenge of engaging folk from the Harvard debate team. And what happened?
Yeah, so it's a really, really amazing moment. It's featured in the film, and it's been covered sort of extensively by the Wall Street Journal. And so in 2015, I was on a team with some colleagues of mine at BPI, and we took on a team from Harvard University in a debate. And we won. I think the story was like one of the top 5, stories searched on Google in that year and went viral and was just picked up by the AP and just all over and throughout the world. And again, what I think, part of what we learned from that story is how many people in the world dislike Harvard, but also, people's interest in the story was founded in the fact that it really challenged how they thought about incarcerated people, right? It's like, wow, these people in prison can beat Harvard. What else are they capable of? And we've been able to leverage that moment to have an ongoing dialogue and conversation, for the past 5 years that really, again, challenges common denigrative narratives of who incarcerated people are and what they're capable of.
Absolutely. And, speaking of challenges, right, we've obviously overcome one hurdle, right? We had Pell restoration now on the horizon. That's about to settle, and we're going to move along in that. But then there's another important piece, right, to higher education in prisons, and that's TAP, right? Tuition Assistance Program. Now, talk a little bit about that for our viewers. Like, what is TAP, and how does that play into making sure that the full support of the educational programs in prisons exists?
Yeah, so again, to dig into the history here, what happened in 1994 when the federal government made incarcerated people ineligible for financial aid, which are Pell grants at the federal level, states all across this country followed suit, right, and made incarcerated people ineligible for state-based financial aid. So in 1994, the Pell ban was enacted at the federal level. In 1995, New York State enacted a TAP program. And so TAP, or the Tuition Assistance Program, is, in a nutshell, state-level financial aid. And so what we saw in New York in particular over that 2-year period is the number of college and prison programs fall from over 70 to 4, right? And so in 1999, Bard College, Max Kenner started the Bard Prison Initiative, and totally privately funded, and for the past 20 years, and overwhelmingly privately funded, and has really done a lot to exemplify the value of college and prison. Right? We know in New York intimately that college and prison is effective. Right? Not only in lowering recidivism, because that's a very, very low bar, but also, I have peers, I have colleagues who have walked out of prison after 5, 10, 15, 20 years into PhD programs at Yale, at Cornell, who have master's degrees from Columbia, who are all over New York City and beyond doing really, really amazing work. And so if we want the college and prison landscape in New York State, particularly, to expand in a real and robust way. And I don't think there's anyone who doesn't at this point. Back in 2004, the governor tried to do a statewide college and prison program and got a lot of pushback. But one of the things that came out of that moment, it was a failed moment. One of the things that came out of that moment was public polling, right? And over 60% of New Yorkers, and this is 2014, were on the side of expanding college and prison, right? And so that number has only risen since then. And so what we need at this point, Pell is a lifeline to college and prison programs, right? We also need TAP to come back, because it has always taken a combination of Pell, TAP, foundation money, and private support to make college and prison work in a real robust way.
And, I was thinking too, right? I was listening to the governor's budget address today. And, when you're talking about the reinstitution of TAP, right, there was no mention of obviously the criminal justice reform platform at all in his address. But I wonder, right, Daiwan, as we're thinking about New York State funding, right, for higher education, particularly around TAP, how difficult will that be, right? We're in right now where the country is in a state of budget austerity. What are some of the things that folk can do to support that?
Yeah, one of the great things about something like TAP restoration, or we like to say it, turn on the tap here in New York, is that college and prison is ultimately a cost-saving mechanism, right? And so this is not going to cost the state money. It is going to save money. But in terms of real dollars that have to go into the program, the state spends anywhere from $800 to $900 million a year on tuition assistance, right?
Burn on.
In terms of, tap to incarcerated individuals, we are talking about a fraction of that. If we look at the years from 2016 to 2019, if TAP had been active during that time, it would have cost the state on average less than 0.5% a year. So less than 0.5% of the total TAP expenditure would have been going to incarcerated individuals. And also, Andre, something important to note is that I don't think we can ever have these conversations wherever we're talking about Pell restoration, TAP restoration, college and prison. We're having coded conversations about race, right? And what we've seen historically in this country is mechanism after mechanisms that have been used to lock primarily minorities out of educational opportunity. Let's recall here in New York City that CUNY was free until Black people showed up on campus, right? Then they started charging. And so it's no happenstance that when we have a prison population here in New York State that is 80% Black and Latino, it is acceptable to make them ineligible for financial aid for higher education, right? This is just as much a race issue as it is an education issue, as it is an economic issue. But again, just really, really want to drive this point home that this is something that makes total sense. It's going to cost money. It's going to save money. It's going to better lives. And it is bipartisanly popular. If Donald Trump is president, can sign Pell restoration into law, I think that's something even under the current budget circumstances that Andrew Cuomo can easily do.
And it's a really good point, right? The intersectionality between race and access to higher education, which you said is often not discussed, but it inextricably linked, right, to everything else, right? Because if we're talking about institutional racism, right, institutional racism impacts every facet of Black and brown folks' lives, whether it be accessing a loan for a home, higher education, medical, your medical supports, like all those things are like compromised, right? And overwhelmingly challenged, right, when you are experiencing racism. So that's a very good point. So, we have a few more minutes remaining, Daiwan, and I'm just thinking so what are some things that folk can do, right, to get involved in this campaign? I know that you referenced earlier, release the tap, right, or turn on the tap, right, like tap water, which is, I think, really catchy and powerful. What are some of the things people can do to support?
So, amazingly, Senator Velmanette Montgomery just retired this year, and for a very long time, she held legislation in the Senate to restore TAP. Her counterpart, Assemblyman in the Assembly, is Assemblyman Aubrey. And I think it would be a fitting way to honor her memory by passing TAP restoration this year. And so what you can do, you can reach out to your local elected officials, your assemblyman, your state senator, and tell them to literally turn on the tap, right? That you want to see TAP restored to incarcerated people. Us at the Barred Prison Initiative have teamed up with CCF,
College Community
Fellowship. And we are going to be organizing and running the Turn on the Tap campaign this budget cycle. And we are really, really aiming to put the governor, the legislature in a position where they can't say no. And, just to highlight something in regard to that, I don't want to make it seem like, this is going to be a fight with everyone. There's broadband support for this within the Assembly, within the Senate. There's some really, really fine people who believe in the value of education in prison. And it's just about getting it done. It's about really making this a priority in Albany. And the way we do that is, everyone who watches this, everyone who hears about it, right, go online, write to your senator, write to your assemblyman, tell them that we should be educating, offering higher education to people in prison, and that we need to restore TAP.
Absolutely. And this is just not here in New York State. As we know that both sides of the bars is shown on 20 and 26 states and 103 stations. This is a national issue. And thanks to Bard College and to Daiwan and our folk from College and Community Fellowship, Vivian Nixon and others, who continue to full-throatedly announce, right, and demand the need to restore TAP. So we still have some fighting to do, right? There's still some challenges, but I'm confident, Daiwan, that you and other leaders who are advancing this campaign to restore TAP will be successful. It's just a matter of time. So how can people viewing this show get in contact with Bar College Initiative?
So BPI, you can find us on media, on the internet, but you can go to bpi.bar.edu and find any information you need to contact us. I'm on Twitter at Daiwan Tatro. And so if you need to reach out to me, you can do it there. I'm also on Instagram, daiwan.t. You can follow me there. My email is attached to both of my accounts. And so I'm someone you reach out to, contact, and going to be working on these issues here in New York and also engaging nationally.
Daiwan Tatro, thank you so much for joining us, both sides of the bars. And for you, the listener and the viewer for this show, we always thank you for joining both sides of the bars. Stay tuned, and we'll see you next month. Be careful, be safe, and be well.
If you want to know how to reduce crime in America, in New York City, you do it one person at a time, creating an environment that celebrates the human spirit. Recidivism is a result of societal failure to do that, and fortune has demonstrated that lives can change.
I tell people all the time, this is where I grew up. This is where I learned what being a man is and what being a productive citizen means.
It is the work of this great organization that has helped to shape my ideas, drive my conviction, and further deepen my commitment to the cause.
For more than half a century, you have amplified the voices of those who are impacted by unfair policies and helped thousands of justice-involved people transform their lives. You have led by example to show how we can help formerly incarcerated individuals come home, rebuild their lives, and contribute to our communities.
COVID-19 worsened existing barriers to reentry. Reentry is hard enough as is, but even harder during a pandemic.
Fortune Society is at the forefront of hope and lasting positive change.